So I'll start by saying I was at a mastermind and someone told me a house hunting hack. And he said that he doesn't invest in real estate unless there is a Starbucks being built in the area. And I was actually quite, fascinated because I didn't really know much about real estate. And he shared that they are a $20 billion company with a bunch of research and development. So why wouldn't he outsource research for where to invest? So I started to think and was like, okay, that's an interesting little thing to make note of in the world. So what happens when we start to think about what a $900 billion company pays attention to? So in 2015, up until 2015, Facebook only had one specific thing you could do to engage with posts, which was like a post. They then added a panel of reactions. And it wasn't until 2020 that they added one more. This little guy. So out of all the different things that that Facebook could have implemented, they chose care. And I thought it was pretty interesting because it's framing around Facebook being a support network, and that in order for it to continue to be relevant and supportive of its people, it wanted to tune into one thing, which was empathy. So I thought it was pretty interesting that it essentially pointed out that we can be connected to people and still feel alone. So as experience designers, community builders, people who are facilitating transformation, instead of feeling like just a number, how can we make sure that our people feel seen, heard, important, and loved? It's quite simple, actually. We give a fuck about them. And in not so many words, we care. So through the lens of care, you can design experiences around romantic partnerships, team dynamics, live events, and community products. These 4 quadrants just happen to be what my historical experience design expertise is in. But for the purpose of this chat, we will keep it to community products. And so what happens when people inside of your community, it could be a mastermind, it could be a membership, it could be a course program, what happens when they feel seen, important, heard, and loved? Currently, there aren't a lot of market standards for tracking care inside of community programs or products. And so I made my own set. So when people feel seen, important, heard, and loved, you have a higher completion rate to your contracts, the completion index. You have higher ascension, meaning that they might progress into additional offers that you might have. Higher retention or resell, so if they stay in your ecosystem longer, they repurchase. Or you have higher evangelism. Admittedly, it took me about a year to realize that if I reordered them, they spelled care. And the last one was, the last one is especially important to me because for those of you who aren't familiar, there is actually a metric called NPS, Net Promoter Score, and that's basically when you take a survey and at the end it says, would you refer us to a friend? Would you suggest? And then it's a yes or no. But in my opinion, I just kind of say fuck NPS because I don't want to know if you would help, spread the message. I want to know if they do. So evangelism metrics and this evangelism index is all about out of the percentage of people that are in your world, how many people have essentially replaced themselves by referring in someone else. And most importantly, out of all of this, if you're an entrepreneur, you're a community builder, you're building something that, of course, these numbers help your bottom line, but you're building a legacy, and you want to be proud of what that experience is. And so without this, you kind of just have the numbers. So I wanted to share a few ways of how I think about this and a few tactics, and again, specifically applying this to more of the community product side. And I want to start with the 2 types of care, and this is kind of the way I think through things. So the first one Always eat tacos over tortilla, so when stuff falls out, boom, extra taco. They're like, okay. But what this points to is pattern recognition. And so the first type of care, in my mind, is anticipatory. And anticipatory care is essentially building in what somebody needs before even they know that they need it. And you can do this because as a community builder or as someone who's facilitating transformation, someone who's literally writing the marketing as a bat signal to call in someone specific with a specific pain point and mindset, you're going to know what they need before they need it. The second, I went through a drive-thru bawling, and the girl asked me if I wanted a chocolate or vanilla milkshake. And I was like, no, I ordered a tea. And she goes, no, honey, you need a milkshake. Service unmatched. Type of care number 2, perceptive. Perceptive care is when you adjust the game plan based on what your people need in the moment because you care enough to read the room and adjust to it. So this essentially means that even after you're paid, you're still paying attention. So to summarize them both, you can kind of think of anticipatory care as fixed or planned support and perceptive care as this variable or one-off. Now, sometimes when you have perceptive care elements that continue to resurface, they might turn into anticipatory care in terms of like your planning. So you just have to pay attention and see when that happens. But essentially, when you look at anticipatory care, it's not just about knowing how they're going to feel. It's about leading them to how you want them to feel. So when you think about, okay, great, how do you lead someone somewhere? You create a map. So inside of business building, so if you are thinking through your customer journey, regardless if it is an event or a community or a product, you're going to have different phases in your business and through their journey. And so you might have your onboarding journey. You're going to have some phases in between through their contract. And then you'll also have an offboarding phase, unless it's a cyclical process. So inside of each of these phases, the way that I design the experience around care is you want to reverse engineer where you want them to go by actually deciding inside of each phase, how do you want your people to, what do you want them to think? How do you want them to feel? What do you want them to say? And what do you want them to do? And so as you're mapping this out, you actually will have different results for each different phase. As an example, in terms of onboarding, you might want your people to think, hey, this was a great investment. I'm glad that I'm here. You want them to feel surprise and delight. Maybe you want them to say, I can tell that they actually care about me as a human. And if you have different business objectives, user-generated content usually pops up. So maybe what you want them to do in the moment is just to share photos or appreciation on social to their networks. So one tactic that I do for this is when you're thinking about physical gifting, I came up with a gifting framework, which is ironically called gift wrap. Dad jokes. Which is recall, advocate, and personalize. The R is for an element inside of the gift they would recognize that you remembered. That there was something that you noticed and you are integrating it into the gift, and they would see themselves in it and they'd be like, oh, that's something that we talked about, that's something that I submitted on an intake form. They're paying attention to me. So it could be their interests, preferences, hobbies, small but important details. Advocate. This is going to be something that you know that they're going to need or they'll feel supported by down the line. So if they're coming into your community, they're in your program, and you're like, hey, like in the sex phase, like you're really going to need this, or this is something to be mindful of, they don't know that yet. So that's something that you can tie into the gift as well. And I'll give you guys an example after this last one. And lastly, personalize. So this is going to be an element that actually isn't personalized to them. It's personalized to you. So in order to kind of check this box, you want it to be something that actually illuminates part of your inner world or your experience so that you're sharing vulnerably and they're emotionally connecting to you, and they're building a relationship with you as the leader of the program or the host of the event. So as an example, you could be gifting a journal with a quote from their favorite author embossed on the cover, which is the recall that they must have mentioned in passing or on an intake form. Because reflection and intention setting will keep them on track, because you know that's going to be a hurdle for them based on what you've seen happen with other clients. As well as including a note that when you're going through a growth edge, downloading your thoughts provided clarity and focus, and you want them to feel the same level of peace and progress. That's the personalization. So when, regardless of what it is, that was just an example. There's other ways of doing it. But when you're looking at each of your different phases, you can kind of cross-check and say, did that actually achieve how I want them to feel in the moment? As an example for offboarding, you might want them to think that even though the contract is over, even though the event's ended, you still have their back, right? You might want them to feel gratitude and reciprocity, and ideally, hey, let's keep working together if there's an option, if it's mutually beneficial. And then ultimately, the action might be to refer friends. So something simple here that you could do to design care into the experience is having something simple at the end of their time with you, where you can either offer something else that's going to support them or give them guidance. So the idea here is what got you here isn't going to be what gets you there. Here's a list of what to expect and things you'll need next. And the key is even if you're not their answer. So this is positioning it as something that we care about you as a human and what's on deck for you. We know what's on deck for you, and it doesn't have to be us. Sometimes the best thing to do, the kindest thing to do, is to reroute them to someone else that they might need. And you also have the opportunity to say, and if you know anyone in your network that we are the answer for, we would love to help them. And that's how you have the opportunity to make that feel really good. So stepping back to perceptive care. And so, you might have, based on what your industries are, like what your offers are, you might have different amounts of people coming through your ecosystem. So this might feel like a tall order. And it's right. Like it's accurate. And it really just depends on how big your container is. So the more intimate it is, the more attention and energy, resources are available to tailoring needs. Obviously, at a larger scale, then you're going to have less. So at the top, you might have higher opportunity for perceptive care. In the center, they might get iced tea if they order iced tea. And maybe at the larger scale, it might just, everyone gets iced tea. So when you're deciding around what level you can offer, there's no wrong answer. But what I wanted to give you guys some examples of some of the high touch scenarios that you could actually weave into your best practices to make sure that if you do have a pretty high intimate container, then you have a baseline of working best practices inside of your company. So the example here would be, let's say that you have a program and you don't necessarily have a window of time where you go through like an experience, track the experiences of your individual clients. There's two different types of awarenesses that happen when you have a higher touch container. The first is explicit, where they're telling you things that are going on in their world. So the first question is, are we aware of any personal matters that have arisen? Have they told us anything that's going on in their life? The second is implicit, which is more you noticing or tracking their behavior. So habit change monitoring. Who's showing up differently? Where are the signals to show us that someone has different needs that you can be perceptive about and meet them where they're at? The action that comes from these are different protocols. So you can have, on the positive side, special touch protocols, so life milestones. So did someone get married? Did someone have a baby? Are there different things that you can send them? Are there messages that you can send them at the lowest baseline? We also have done contingency protocols. So if someone were to go MIA, we call it ghost protocol, right? So having something embedded with your team to support making sure that people know that they're noticed when they're missing. That could, and you can build out whatever process makes the most sense for you. Needing accountability. We had something called fly protocol where we would tap them every day until they gave us the thing that they were procrastinating on. So it really just depends on your level of touch, but there are definitely things that you can do in terms of having conversations with your team, circulating information about the experiences of your people, and then having a backup plan to support them if and when something happens. So I just wanted to end on something for you in terms of outsourcing research for where to invest. And so this is for you specifically. So people who are looking to invest in communities, invest in events, you don't need to tap a $900 billion company to save yourself a lot of time, energy, and resources. So if you remember this slide, are the community KPIs. These are things that if you have a community or if you're hosting an event, these are things that you can track for yourself, but they also double as entry questions when you're looking to join or invest in something. So this is what that looks like. You get on an entry call with whoever's informing you of the opportunity. You say, hey, how many members complete when they enroll? You say, hey, how many people are set up for success to the point where they can invest in your next offer? You say, how many people stay in your ecosystem? What's the average length of member that stays with you? And lastly, out of all the members that you have, what percentage refer other people? What percentage of your membership base are referrals? And all of these things are going to help with not only your internal tracking and making sure that having quantitative examples of how much you quote unquote care, but it also allows you to make sure that when you're investing with your own time and resources, that you can ask the questions to make sure that you're in the right place too. That's all.